Um, I did not consciously plan to make this video, but I have been working for a few days to make my videos intelligible, and the more I read Hegel, the more I understand myself, and the more I understand that I understood Hegel before reading Hegel. So the more I read Hegel, the more I feel stupid, in a way. But I would like to talk about nature and paganism, and I've already made videos about this, but I realize that I make the same videos over and over again, but each time they are better, in a sense, from an intellectual standpoint, because I understand more, it's more determined, it's more clear. Now there are illustrations, so I will try to talk briefly about nature and paganism. So this is the broad view, of God, so to speak. Do we see? Yeah. God fucking damn it. So this is the view of being, so to speak. You have logic, speculative logic, which is the mind of God. Here I will talk with ordinary language. Logic, which is the totality of all thought determinations, namely categories, reflexions, Bestimmungen, and concepts. This is what Hegel calls the idea, which is the totality of all logical determinations. So the idea makes itself nature, manifests itself, creates, so to speak, the world, the universe, the world of nature. And out of nature emerges, it's not a chronological process, it's a logical process. It's not chronological, it's logical. Out of nature emerges spirit or Geist, which here means the mind or consciousness, and consciousness is simply defined as the relation of the I, the self, to an object. And self-consciousness is relation to self. I will illustrate. Actually, I am simplifying ideas that it took me a very long time to understand. I am conscious of an objective world. I see objects, things that I consider to be external to me. I perceive, I see, I sense. Yeah, this is my consciousness, my sensuous consciousness, my perception. I touch, see, feel objects, I see, but also, even if I close my eyes and try to detach myself from my senses, I am in relation to myself. I am me. I think. I am in relation to me. So even if there were no perception, there would still be self-consciousness. Namely, I can say, I am in relation to myself. I can think about myself as a transcendental ego, which is God in the intellectual sense, the mind of Kant or Fichte or Hegel, so to speak. Or I can think about me as an empirical individual, about my psychology, my history. I can think about logic, whatever. So this is self-consciousness, the relation of the I to an object. And here, do we see? Yeah. So, yeah. And this is a three-way process, a Trinitarian process. In Christian language, God the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, so to speak. So the idea makes itself nature, nature makes itself Geist or spirit, and the purpose of man or consciousness is to reconstruct logic, nature, and the world of spirit to be reunited with logic, so to speak. So God becomes conscious of himself through mind or consciousness. So expressed in ordinary language, God has to actualize himself through man. And spirit is the realm of, like I said, consciousness, and it includes subjective, objective, and absolute spirit. This is anthropology and psychology and consciousness, all the institutions, politics, economics, history, etc., and art, religion, philosophy. And in the view of Hegel, which is actually the view of God, which is my view, in the realm of nature, so I could say this is simplified, but this is the mind of God, this is the body of God, and this nature is what we in the West or in the world today we call physics, chemistry, and biology. The world of time, space, matter, energy, forces, and laws. This is the world of physics, but eventually physics brings forth, so to speak, chemistry, and chemistry, this is the history, the official history, chemistry 4 billion years ago started to reproduce itself, to replicate itself, and this is what we call life, and the official story says that for the past 4 billion years or so there have been life. But in my view, humans, how should I explain this? It's not very clear to me, so that's why I struggle to explain, but humans, here biology is the non-human living organism. So the body of man is biological, but man emerges, how should I explain this? Anthropology, what we call sociobiology, is here, is in subjective spirit, in the sense that apes, non-conscious apes are here, and conscious apes, that which we call human, are here in subjective spirit. So it's kind of weird, but here I will talk about the atheistic view. This is the view of God. It's not chronological. It begins here. Spirit has to recognize itself in nature, in itself, subjective relative to absolute spirit, and to reconstruct logic and to unify the three spheres, so to speak. And this is the actualization of God. Okay. Now I will talk about the official narrative. The perspective that we, here I speak as a Westerner, we have in the West. The official story says that the logic is not speculative logic, and it is not called the mind of God. It is what I call atheistic logic, which is either classical logic or symbolic logic, ordinary logic. The idea that logic and mathematics, that's not how physicists express this, but they say that actually what they think is that logic and mathematics, which for them are one, in the sense that mathematics is derived from logic, is grounded upon logic. That's the view of modern logicians. They say that the universe began with the Big Bang, so the physical world appeared with the expansion of the universe, hot, density, expansion, the appearance of a very small point where all the energy of the universe was contracted, and then it expanded with the atoms, etc., etc. And then helium and hydrogen, which was the vast majority of the atoms of the universe, created, I don't know exactly the official story, but that somehow it created stars which exploded, which created heavy atoms and molecules. Eventually, that's how iron, oxygen, I don't know how you call this in English, schnapps, chaos, I don't know how you call this in English, the heavy atoms, all the atoms of the universe, but also gold, silver, etc., etc., were created in the explosion of stars. That's the famous sentence by Mr. Krauss, forget Jesus, the stars died so you could be born. So that's a pretty good piece of poetry, Mr. Krauss. And then the official story says that physics and chemistry, so cosmology, the universe, etc., galaxies were formed, the solar system, planets, etc. And the official story says that broadly 4 billion years ago, very complex chemical molecules or structures of molecules started to self-replicate, to divide themselves and to create reproductions of themselves, and this is what we call life. And life then has gone through a Darwinian process of evolution, and the very first primitive forms of life, primitive cells, developed into bacteria, eukaryotes, prokaryotes, etc. And eventually, over broadly 4 billion years, it created mammals, which created the family of monkeys and apes, which created humans. So the official story goes from atheistic mathematics and logic. The physicists do not say that there was mathematics and logic, God knows where, but they say that the universe appeared spontaneously and was immediately, so to speak, mathematically organized. These are the constants of physics, the constant, the mathematical determinations of the physical universe. And the physicists, the theoretical physicists, ask themselves, where do the constants of physics come from? And the official story says that out of physics, chemistry, biology emerged man. The official story says broadly 400,000 years ago or 200,000 years ago, that which we call Homo sapiens, which became conscious. The biologists cannot date precisely the birth of consciousness in their worldview, but here at some moment man emerged, modern, intelligent, thinking man emerged out of nature. Then the question is, where the primitive ancestors, some 7 million years ago, the first Homo, were they conscious? Or is it really with Homo sapiens that consciousness emerged? And then language? We do not really know. But the official story says man emerged out of nature. And here, I adopt a Schellingian Fichtean view. Schelling and Fichte, the German idealist philosophers, they did not know the official story, the chronological story. They did not know about Darwinism, because Schelling and Fichte is the end of the 18th century, the beginning of the 19th century. But in their view, I simplify to the utmost. You have nature, and out of nature emerges, that's the process, emerges Geist, or spirit, or mind, or consciousness, and mind, or consciousness, or Geist is a reflection. It is nature reflecting upon itself. That's why there are two arrows, one up, so mind or spirit emerges out of nature, and mind can reflect back upon nature, namely the world of physics, chemistry, biology, and it's a reflection in the sense that nature mirrors spirit, mirrors back spirit, and spirit reflects upon nature. So nature, I simplify here, the Schellingian Fichtean perspective, spirit is a mirror that nature holds to herself, so to speak, so that nature contemplates herself through man. When we study nature, from this perspective, we study ourselves, because we are made of the stuff of nature. And Fichte, in Die Bestimmung des Menschen, the destiny of man, says that all the points of view, so in the realm of spirit, which would be subjective spirit, all the points of view that men, conscious spirit, have upon nature, so all the thinking minds are nature thinking about herself unconsciously, the totality of all these consciousnesses is the total consciousness that nature has of itself. So that's why, footnotes to Plato, Matthew Siegel says that we, in his Schellingian perspective, we humans, we are here, we are Geist, we are nature philosophizing. If I had to illustrate, this is a sentence that I discovered myself many years ago, but that's what I said at the beginning of the video. The more I understand Hegel, the more I understand that I knew many things without Hegel. Hegel just helped me clarify, but okay. I said to myself, the stars cannot speak. The stars were in the realm of physics and eventually chemistry. The stars, they cannot speak. They are voiceless. But we, here, in this Schellingian atheistic or not, but in this cosmological, evolutionary perspective, and in this sense, Schelling was an evolutionary philosopher without ever knowing about Darwin. But he maybe didn't talk about evolution, but the process in his perspective was nature transforming, so to speak, evolving, developing into spirit, and spirit reflecting back upon nature. So the stars, they cannot speak, but we, in this perspective, we can think and speak, and we can reflect upon nature and study nature. And because we are made of the stuff of nature, as Mr. Krauss, Lawrence Krauss, the atheistic theoretical physicist says, the stars died so that you could be born. But we, as human beings, we are composed, we are made of, our bodies are made of stardust, the heavy atoms which constitute the vast majority of our body, if not all, have been produced from this cosmological perspective by the explosion of stars. That's what created heavy atoms. So the stars did not disappear. They transformed over the evolutionary process, and the result of this transformation in this evolutionary perspective is man, and man, through his thinking activity, can reflect back upon his past and become the voice of the voiceless, so to speak, and speak for the stars. That's why we are nature philosophizing. We, in this perspective, we are the result of broadly 4 billion years of evolution, and that's why our ancestors, our non-human ancestors in this Darwinian perspective, they cannot speak, but we can speak for the fossils. We can tell the stories of the fossils, the story of the missing link, that was in the 19th century, the story of our cousins, the apes, which are not our ancestors, but they are a branch of supposedly our cousins precisely, but we can reconstruct our past from this perspective, and we can speak for those who cannot, because we are the result of the process. And also, here is more of a Hegelian perspective, but it's ordinary perspective. Spirit, namely Geist, mind or consciousness, can reflect upon itself, think about itself, and that's what humans do every day. We, as thinking agents, we think about objective spirit, subjective spirit, or absolute spirit. When we talk about politics, it is spirit thinking about objective spirit, namely spirit thinking about itself. When we talk about psychology, we think about our own psyche. We think about the psyche of others, but others are also minds or consciousnesses, and we think about their subjective spirit, which is our subjective spirit. When we talk about religion or art, modern pop culture, it is spirit reflecting upon itself. And in this evolutionary Schellingian Fichtean perspective, all the products of spirit are products of nature, namely law. For instance, legislation is a product of spirit, but spirit is a product of nature. So nature, in this perspective, contemplates herself through the mediation of man by studying the American Constitution. So in this view, the stars died so that Americans could talk about the American Constitution. Of course, to reconstruct the entire process is very complicated, but yeah. This is the perspective. And now, the question of the video is, what is nature? Here I said it's the world of time, space, matter, energy, the four fundamental forces of physics, and all the laws of physics. So, God fucking damn it. The question is the relationship between nature and paganism. What is nature? What is paganism? If we take nature in the perspective of physicists and scientists, nature is, like I said, the realm of time, space, matter, and the laws of physics. So, if pagans are those who worship nature. This is often defined. What is a pagan? Is someone who worships nature. Then it would mean that someone like Lawrence Krauss, with his story, The Greatest Story Ever Told So Far, which is a book about theoretical physics, he would be a pagan. It's a basic syllogism. If paganism means to admire nature, a theoretical physicist who admires the laws of nature and the structure of the universe is a pagan. Or A Universe from Nothing, that's a pagan book in this perspective. The Principia of Newton, who kind of praises the harmony in a Newtonian perspective, the harmony of nature, the law of gravity, universal gravitation, the mathematical structure of the world. That would be a pagan book. Although Newton was a Christian, in a historical perspective, he's praising nature, because this is nature, grasped theoretically. Or, other illustration, the famous lectures on physics by Feynman. I have the 5 volumes. I have not read all of them. I haven't had the time, but you have mechanics, it's in French, you have mechanics, electromagnetism, and quantum mechanics. So this was the top, made accessible in the 1960s, the top of knowledge by one of the physical geniuses of 20th century physics, namely Richard Feynman. And he praised the very complex structure of nature, namely the physical world. So in this sense, if paganism means to admire or to worship nature, then Richard Feynman was a pagan, independently of his personal leaning towards, I don't know what, if personally he was a pagan, not a pagan, Catholic, Protestant, atheist, Buddhist, whatever. It's not important in this perspective. And then, someone like Mr. Dawkins, the greatest show on earth. This is not about theoretical physics, this is about biology, but biology is organic life, which is chemistry made organic in the modern atheistic perspective. So when Mr. Dawkins praises biology, the river of life, I don't know, that's the French version, I don't know how it's in English, the river, you get the point. The story of our ancestors, the magic of reality. I have lots of books by Dawkins. He praises biology, the world of life and Darwinian evolution. So in this sense, he's a biologist praising nature in the particularity of organic life. There's also the particularity of chemical determinations and physical determinations. So in this sense, if paganism is the worship of nature, then Dawkins and Feynman and all the great physicists, biologists, chemists of the present and of the past have been pagans. And Galileo, who famously said that nature is a book written in mathematical language, if being a pagan means being interested in nature, every pagan should read Galileo, Newton, Huygens, Maxwell, Lavoisier, Maxwell, Faraday, Einstein. Einstein was a pagan in this perspective. And then all the quantum physicists, those who have Schrödinger, all those who have developed quantum physics, Feynman, and the modern theoretical physicists. But then, I anticipate the critic. People say, no, but when we say nature, here I know what the pagan thing is. They say, that's not what we mean by nature. So, the pagans are not theoretical physicists or chemists or biologists, because they think, okay, that's not really what we mean when we say nature. Okay, so what is nature then is, I cannot understand. They believe that nature is what is differentiated from what is artificial. There is the natural world, which is good, and the artificial world, which is bad. So here, my drawings are not very good, but you get the picture. So that's the naive view, but it's very important from a Hegelian perspective. There's the idea that nature, what is natural, the trees, the forest, the sun, the mountains, the river, the sea, the wildlife, fishes, birds, singing, this is natural, and in their perspective this is good, and this is artificial, modern buildings, pollution, crowded city, filth, the comforts of homes, and traditional native Indian housing, and here I call this called a hammock or hammock, which I don't know where it comes from, but yeah. But this perspective, the idea that you could divide what is natural, in this sense, nature or natural means that which has not been influenced negatively, this is implied negatively by man, and what is not natural is that which is artificial, namely what is man-made. And in the view of some naive pagans, the natural world, which is not influenced by man, is good, and the artificial world is bad. But these pagans, they live in houses, and they use the internet and books to spread their ideas. So that's contradictory, but anyway. But let us talk about this perspective, because it's very important. Let us take the example of Western Europe, the traditional, in the official story, the traditional homeland of paganism, in the sense of European paganism. Well, I am pretty sure that there is not a single piece, a single square, how do you call this in English? Square root, a square meter, a geometrical determination in Western Europe, which has not, over the past 5,000 years, been modified even slightly by the activity of man. Maybe I'm wrong, but actually I'm sure that it's not, because over the course of the historical process, let us assume that there's a historical process, over the course of history, man in Europe has shaped the landscapes. He has worked, here that's a Marxist perspective, but it's common sense. Man has transformed through his activity his environment to make the environment suitable for life. Trees have been cut down either for wood and heating, or to expand fields to grow agriculture. How do you call this? Swamps have been dried. Mountains, tunnels have been built. That's in the modern life. Tunnels have been built under mountains. A path in order to walk have been made on mountains. Lakes have been, dams have been built around lakes. Forests have been planted and regrown. There have been fires caused by man which destroyed forests. You can imagine any mountain in Europe. You will find plastic in the mountain. So man has implemented his influence on every mountain in Europe. You can find plastic, plastic bags, cigarette butts, chewing gums, glass, beer bottles, wherever. So the influence of man is present everywhere in Europe, because it has been historically a continent which has been highly populated and populated for a long time. It's an old civilization. And yeah, and even in almost every forest in Europe, there are paths which are made by man to facilitate walking in the forest. There have been hunters shooting bullets at animals, and the bullets might eventually fall into a tree or stumble on the ground or whatever, in a sense, what I'm trying to express, it seems completely dumb, but actually it means that there is, in an old civilization like Europe, a geographical area which has been inhabited and populated for thousands of years officially, the influence of man is everywhere. So a natural environment does not exist in Europe. What would be a natural environment? Namely, a physical location where man has not had any influence whatsoever. The desert of the Sahara, in the middle of the deserts in Africa, or in a Gobi Desert in Asia, maybe there has no man influence. But if you go in the middle of the desert, you survive for about a few hours, and then you die of overheating or cold or starvation. In the highest mountains of the Everest, maybe man has had no influence, but if you go there, if you go into nature, you freeze to death in 1 hour. In the core of the Amazonian forest, where not even the primitive tribes of the Amazonian forest live, you may say, okay, that's a natural environment. Man has not corrupted the heart of the Amazonian forest with modern technology, pollution, etc. You go there, you will be bitten by a poisonous creature, you will die in 30 minutes, or you will get a fever and you will die. You may say, in the heart of a volcano, there are no human influence. You go into the heart of a volcano, you melt into the lava and you disappear. In Antarctica, man has not extended his influence there. You go to Antarctica, you freeze to death. So, the bottom of the ocean, because the submarines cannot go too deep, because the pressure of the water makes even the submarine kind of the pressure is too intense. So the bottom of the ocean is not reachable for modern man-made technology. If you try to go to the bottom of the ocean, the pressure crushes your ears, your lungs, and you die of suffocation, and your bottle of oxygen is crushed by the pressure and you die. So if you really want to find a natural environment on Earth, it's a very hostile, wild nature is very hostile. But even in this perspective, here I adopt a very dumb ecological perspective, man, through his activity anywhere on Earth, creates pollution. He rejects CEO, which is elevated into the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is all around the globe. And that's why the ecologists say daily that the activity of man has negative polluting consequences all over the planet. So by his very existence, man modifies his environment. I said this in a previous video. The very fact that I exist, my body interacts with the external world. When I breathe, my body regulates the temperature of my inside to make my living conditions stable, and when I breathe, I modify the external world, which is in connection with the totality of the atmosphere. I breathe in air and I expire air, which is has been transformed by the activity of my lungs and my heart. So I am constantly modifying nature, and on an industrial scale. The pollution in a highly developed country, it has influence all over the atmosphere. So even the hostile places like the Sahara, the Everest, Antarctica, the Amazonian forest, they are influenced by man. So if I take back my drawing, there is not a single geographical, spatial location anywhere on Earth which has not been influenced by the activity of spirit. So the natural world, in this sense of not artificial world, is a complete delusion. It does not exist in this sense. So this dichotomy is false. And then people will say, yeah, but pagans are people who enjoy to walk in the forest. Okay, but then again, what is nature when you say this? Because you may say, okay, but nature we mean organic life. But at the bottom of the sea there's a lot of organic life. And I do not see many pagans who are divers, how do you call this? Depth divers, the people who go, yeah. And mountains, the sun, the clouds, the rivers, in the view of naive pagans, this is paganism. The mountains, the sun, the moon, the clouds, the seas, and that. But these are not living objects. in the sense that this is the sun is not an organic body, nor the mountains, nor the rivers, etc. So I'm just trying to prove that the thoughts of what paganism is are contradictory. That's what they have to move and to evolve. It seems dumb and a waste of time, but actually it's very serious. It's Hegelianism. It's a refutation of the false determination of what paganism is. But what is false? If it is false, it has to develop, to grow. So nature is not Galileo and Newton and Einstein and Feynman and Krauss in the view of pagan, although it is actually. It's not the natural versus the artificial, because everything is artificial on Earth. So everything has been made artificial just through the spread of pollution. Pollution spreads everywhere. So man has artificialized the Earth. That's what the ecologists complain about. And now I have a third picture. Let us talk about permaculture. The modern right-wing pagans, some of them are attracted by permaculture. And in their view, permaculture is paganism. And in this sense, I think they are true. And here I will try to illustrate. Permaculture. The idea is that's the idea shared by right-wing pagans and also left-wing ecologists. There is the idea, which is vaguely expressed, that there was nature, primitive nature, or the environment of the primitive peoples, the non-civilized peoples, as they call this, native Indians before whites went to Northern America, some southern tribes of Australia, or southern Amazonian tribes, the Aborigines of Australia, the shamans of Siberia, whatever. The idea that primitive people lived in harmony with nature, and that is natural. And here's the leftist ecological narrative, very simplified. And then there was a break-off, a separation, that which we call modernity, with Descartes, we should make ourselves master and possessors of nature, Francis Bacon, Galileo, Newton. This is at the turning point of the 17th century. This is the first 3 quarters of the 17th century, what we call the scientific revolution, the modern, rationalistic, empirical, investigating, inquiring view of nature. These are the names which are most famous. It began with Bacon, then Galileo and Descartes, and finally Newton was kind of the pinnacle of the process of 17th century science, which gave birth to the modern world, because the Newtonian revolution, which was influenced by these free men, which themselves had been influenced by the process of the Renaissance, but Newton was kind of the culmination of scientific achievement, and it gave birth to the metaphysical revolution of the 18th century. I simplify to the utmost the will to negate metaphysics and bring down religion, and this gave birth to the theistic view, the deist view in 18th century France, and later Newton had an influence upon the will to reorganize law, legislation, politics, and eventually economics in a rationalistic view. This is Montesquieu in the realm of politics in France, and then Adam Smith in Scotland and England with The Wealth of Nations, and Lavoisier, the chemist, also. So to say that Adam Smith is a byproduct of Newton, if I express this like that, it's not really true, but actually the will to rationalize economics is a byproduct of what Newton historically made in the realm of physics, namely to rationalize the celestial and the earthly sphere. So I simplify to the utmost. So this is what is considered to be the Western mind, which is modernity, and this is considered to be artificial. This is considered to be negative Western influence, the beginning of the will to dominate and control nature, which brought forth the Industrial Revolution, pollution, the destruction of nature, the exploitation of natural resources. In the view of, I simplify, but in the view of ecologists, things were good, and then things turned bad with Descartes, symbolically, and then it was really a catastrophe. And then we have a return to permaculture, by both ecological leftists and also right-wing pagans. And permaculture, they naively believe that permaculture is a return to good old nature, but that's a Hegelian process. It's not good old nature, because good old nature is very hostile. It is a return to the first moment, to the natural moment, through the mediation of the negative moment, the moment of separation, the moment of the rationalistic ego of Western, which is embodied by Western. It doesn't mean that only Westerners have this scientific view, but historically these are Western white men who developed the modern statistical, mathematical, empirical, theoretical, investigating, scientific view. So permaculture is the will to return to the first moment, to live in harmony with nature. But the primitive people, they were very smart. They had an empirical knowledge of nature. They had no conceptual, scientific, theoretical view, but this is known in right-wing pagan circles as well as in left-wing ecological circles, that the primitive people had a tremendous knowledge of the herbs, the plants, the animals, the cycles of the weather, the seasons, the meteorology. They had no conceptual knowledge, but they had empirical, intuitive knowledge. And permaculture is an attempt to unify these two moments, and that's a Hegelian process. And permaculture is the unity of natural and artificial in this sense. And I said it is Hegelian farming, and it is spiritual. It is spiritual farming because a permaculture garden or a permaculture farm, it seems to be natural, but actually it's the most highly spiritual form of agriculture, because in order to implement a permaculture farm, one has to have a tremendous knowledge of physics, chemistry, and mostly biology, plants, vegetables, the cycles of the meteorology, the harmony, the relationship between the various plants, how one type of plant corresponds with another. So in order to implement a permaculture garden, it can be made easy, and there are many books, mostly in the Western world, but also the Japanese and in India, all over the world, books which are made to promote this view of permaculture. But in order to implement a truly working, functioning, efficient system of permaculture, it requires a tremendous amount of intelligence and knowledge and data and thinking and inquiring. And the leftist, ecologically minded leftists who have permaculture gardens, they are usually very, very smart and very knowledgeable. So they incorporate within their permaculture farm the negative moment of modernity. It doesn't mean that they have read Descartes, Galileo, Newton, etc., but they understand the scientific process, and they want to go back to the first moment, which is harmony with nature, through the mediation of the second moment, which is separation and negativity. And a real, I would say, a real here means wirklich, an actual permaculture garden is, in the realm of agriculture, it's a spiritual totality, because I will retake my view, because spirit, here in this view, has incorporated all the knowledge of nature in order to reflect back upon itself. And I don't know where to classify a permaculture garden. It would be objective spirit, because it's a way of making a living. So it is spirit conceptualizing nature, conceptualizing itself in terms of the influence that the modern industrial world has had upon nature, and therefore, because nature and man are connected, the negative influence. So here I simplify, but spirit studies nature. Nature is being polluted, degraded, exploited. So spirit studies, here it would be absolute spirit, namely the history of philosophy. Instead, okay, who should we blame? Descartes is to blame. Descartes, Galileo, Newton, Bacon, all these Western arrogant men who wanted to control and possess nature, they are responsible, which is partly true, which is true. But And we will investigate the history of philosophy and sciences and nature through a theoretical perspective, and the negative influences of industry, capitalism, pollution, waste, modern development. And through this great intellectual process, because the ecological leftists who talk about permaculture and ecology, the intelligent, they are really smart. They are not dumb. And through this cognitive process, they will incorporate all this knowledge in order to produce, in the realm of spirit, in the realm of objective spirit, to produce a permaculture farm or sustainable development, to promote ecology, to promote sustainable agriculture. And this is the result of an entire conceptual process. So the ecologists are very smart. I mean, some of them, they are a little simple-minded, saying capitalism bad, primitive life good. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But the real leftist ecologists, as well as the right-wing pagans who go into the process of creating they are really smart. So a permaculture farm is a spiritual garden. It is the reconciliation of spirit and nature through the means of logic and rational thinking. So it's, if I wanted to talk like a Christian, I said this is the Garden of Eden made manifest on earth. And those who live in a permaculture farm, they are probably very happy. And that's good for them. Okay. And now, I will continue. So, I have briefly talked about the first two moments. The idea that paganism is the worship of nature. I have simplified to the utmost, saying that, okay, then the theoretical physicists, the biologists, they are pagans. And then a pagan might say, okay, that's not what I meant. And I say, okay, you mean artificial versus natural. That's not sustainable. I mean, the argument is not sustainable. But actually, I've just said that permaculture is precisely the unity of artificial and natural made sustainable. That's sustainable development. So, but the pagan might say, that's not what I meant either. What I actually meant is paganism is interested in the supernatural, the stories about fairies, witches, mythology, etc., etc. But here, let us investigate what the pagans, here it's the folklore community. People like, you have both the left and the right, people like Scarlett Ravenswood and Caroline Emmerich. These are mostly women who are interested in this kind of stuff, witches, fairies, spirits of all sorts, energy. They say we are pagans because we are interested in nature and in the supernatural. But I've written here, nature and supernatural, this is Roman etymology, natura, super, natura means above nature. And if you transform the Romans into Greeks, which are very connected historically, culturally, linguistically, the Greek etymology for the same word is physis, which gave us physics, and metaphysics. Metaphysical means that which is above physics. So what is supernatural and what is metaphysical are two words of the same group to mean the same thing, basically, the same object. And here, in the view is that metaphysics is the realm of Plato, Aristotle, Kant, etc., all the history of Western metaphysics. And here, the supernatural, in their view, is science fiction, heroic fantasy, magic, stories about witches and vampires and magicians, deities, whatever. But, so here you have the metaphysical aspect, which in the view of these folkloric pagan is science fiction, heroic fantasy, magic. You have physics, which in the view, on this perspective, physics is what I talked earlier, it's the view of Galileo, Newton, Einstein, etc. And in their view, physics, which for them is nature, it's paganism. For them, paganism is about science fiction, heroic fantasy, mythology, magic, fairies, whatever. It's the supernatural, and it is nature. But in the other perspective, if you change the language, you have physics and metaphysics, that which we call science and philosophy. Instead of this, you have Plato, Aristotle, Kant, etc., etc. You have the scientific view, and actually, the purpose of cultural Hegelianism is simply to show that these two sides are actually one. They are the same. The entire purpose of my channel, the reason why I make videos about the theoretical aspect, the metaphysics of Kant and Hegel, and I talk about Plato in my video, I talk about Aristotle, is to try to elevate the mind of, to prepare the mind of these people to enter here, to show them that actually they are the same. Yeah, that's all I had to say. And another example, people in the pagan community, they say, oh, the supernatural, that's interesting, that's fascinating, that's mysterious. But mystery comes from mystical, which means initiated to the divine mysteries. And what is mysterious is often mystical, and what is mystical is another word for what is speculative in the view of Hegel. So, here we have speculative logic, which is mystical logic. And yeah, so that's what I had to say. And I've been working for several days to present as clearly as possible my ideas. But then I understood this also a few days ago, that by doing just the theoretical aspect of the work, by sharing conceptual ideas, so to speak, by sharing concepts, I'm not gonna reach anyone, because it's too abstract, it's too disconnected from ordinary consciousness, and that's precisely why I have to unite the metaphysical, the speculative, with the science fiction, heroic fantasy, etc., to connect the two to make my message intelligible. But I try to find a proper balance between intellectual rigor, intellectual seriousness, and popularity, in a sense, which is the entire purpose of cultural Hegelianism. So I've been working to try to find a proper balance to make very complex philosophical ideas intelligible. But if I just share the cultural aspect without a serious background, people will not understand. If I just share the serious aspect without the cultural influence, they will not understand either. So I try to find a proper balance, and then my purpose with cultural Hegelianism is to convert every thinking consciousness to my religion, my philosophy. Yeah, that's what I had to say.